No, I'm going to tell Kendra I need it. We'll do that. All right. Good. Good afternoon, everybody. We're reviewing how to wash hands and things here. I think we're all set to go, though, now? All right. Today, welcome to our third budget work session for FY 2021. We started off with Mayor Michelandro and his team talking about equity and putting that in our budget, and then we had a marathon session on DHS and housing and CPHD, and today we've got DES, another small department. And I won't say anything about who's leader because our manager has this wonderful way of introducing his folks. Like to remind everybody, we've got the presentations that we're doing today. They are available online. So is the whole entire big, thick budget, all 400 and something pages of it. And we're going to hear today on DES, and then we're going to hear from a representative of the E2C2 Commission, who's not here quite yet, but should be here. And we'll get started. Oh, is he here? Great. Okay. Welcome, Mr. Bloom. All right.
So thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce each department director. This year, we're taking the letters from the department and rearranging them. So we had Claude Williamson was from CPHD, and we knew that he was a planning lover. But here, I'd like to introduce Greg Emanuel, someone who laments rivers, is a seer, and a veteran.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
All in there.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. So I'm Greg Emanuel, Environmental Services Director. I'm here backed by a really capable team. So I'll just go to a few introductions like the other directors did the other day. So that includes my deputy, Mike Moon. He's kind of my right-hand guy, and occasionally the elbow and shoulder when needed. We got my division chiefs. We got Dennis Leach from Transportation, George May from Facilities Engineering, Dimitri McBride from our Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management, and who did I miss? Mike Collins from Operations, and then most of the bureau chiefs are here as well, because really most of the action happens out in our bureaus. Of course, we've got to have the support side of the team too. Tyler Smith is our financial lead, Catherine McCarty for Administrative Services, and Jessica Baxter from Communications Engagement. So it all happens as a really big team. But the real work, of course, happens out there in the field where the mission is happening, and the infrastructure and the environment. So whether it's fixing an overhead door in a fire station, replacing a leaking valve in a neighborhood, fixing a leaking toilet in a library, testing samples at the lab at the plant, replacing a meter box in the sidewalk that's embedded within it, or replacing the brakes on a school bus. It's out there where the trades workers, the maintenance technicians, the equipment technicians, equipment operators, plant operators, construction managers, and project managers are just kind of making things happen, along with our contractors. So our agenda today is going to cover 3 funds. We'll first go over the DS General Fund, and then at the chair's pleasure, maybe have a break after the general fund, and then we'll have utilities and stormwater after that.
The break's for questions, right?
Yes.
Nobody can leave the room, but we will ask questions. All right, thank you. Just clarifying. Okay.
All right. All right, since we're covering a lot of ground today, I just wanted to ground our budget requests in the context of our departmental mission and vision. So while the strategic investments in infrastructure and sometimes our utility emergencies often get a lot of the focus and attention because of disruptive, most of what we do in the operating budget is less dramatic. It's all about making our community vibrant, accessible, and resilient with a focus on safety, innovative operations and maintenance, and of course, excellent customer service. And we try to do all that in a sustainable way. So this slide is a snapshot of our broad and vital services to the community. Some of the highlights from last year include paving 76.5 miles of our 1,059 total lane miles, filling over 5,600 potholes, and adding more protected bike lanes in the county, now totaling 5.9 miles. The most recent add this past year was about 1/3 of a mile on North Quincy from Fairfax to Washington Boulevard. We expanded our customer service to hours to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at the contact center, and we also innovated with a virtual assistant. This slide also highlights how committed we are as a government and a community to the environment. We've got a recycling rate of 50%. And of course, this past year, we updated our community energy plan with the board with the goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2050. And with our new solar farm power purchase agreement with Dominion Energy, we've got a significant step forward to reaching that goal. So I'll touch more on transit services later in the presentation, but our ridership has begun to increase, and we've successfully transitioned ART to a new contractor, and the future of ART looks really bright. Finally, we're committed to maintaining our utility infrastructure, and these numbers demonstrate our ongoing investment in constructing, replacing, and inspecting our water, sanitary, and storm sewer pipes. And then after the July 8th storm last year, which we'll never forget, staff conducted almost 200 site visits in response to flooding and attended 30 community meetings. So for the FY21 DS proposed budget, expenditures are proposed to go up 10% for a total proposed budget of $111 million. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that seems like a really big percentage and number on its face, but there are very good reasons behind it we'll get into, including 44% of that being driven by the new ART contract. Revenue is going up by about 4%, and our authorized staffing levels are proposed to increase by 11 FTEs. Most of those are actually kind of accounting adjustments as we reset the budget. 3 of them are formalizing Amazon growth positions that were authorized by the board last year. And then 3 represent a shift in limited term positions from the development fund and CPHD back to the DES general fund. I think Claude made a comment about that on Monday. So the remaining growth in 5 FTEs we're proposing are centered on safety, core infrastructure, the needs and service levels basically where the demand or cost has outstripped the resources. And the next slides will break that out more clearly. I would say that, of course, like other departments, this year's proposed budget stands in a significant contrast to the last couple of years, where we eliminated 6.5 general fund positions over the last couple of cycles and did a lot of internal realignments and service reductions. So we organized our request, as you see here, into 2 buckets that kind of tie back to the manager's themes. Under resiliency and infrastructure, we made necessary adjustments in core services and street safety, while still proposing environmental investments to kind of keep that balance. And the single biggest driver was the new ART contract. It was a much improved contract that we needed to do, but it adds 4.4 more million annually. Under supporting our community, the biggest single driver was the new Lover Run Community Center, which will be coming online this fall, and it's required support for a much larger footprint. And now we'll go into more details on the subsequent slides. First, let's hit the fees quickly. We're proposing an inflationary increase of 2.5% to all DES development services related fees, consistent with those proposed increases in the development fund, again, that Claude talked about in the CPHD briefing. On the household solid waste rate, the rate is proposed to increase by $13.03, and let's go straight to those details. The $13 increase in this full cost recovery program is driven by increases in disposal costs, primarily recycling, along with some salary non-discretionary costs, things for like software for licenses, the glass recycling costs, rental book, things like that. So the graph on the lower right shows the story on recycling. So whereas we used to get revenue of over $14 a ton just 3 years ago, 2 years ago, we reached a break-even point. You can see the line turns from green to red. And now it costs an increasing amount to recycle, as shown in the dramatic trend line. However, it's still cheaper than our current disposal costs. So I should have a line on there about at the $42 lines. So the recycling is still cheaper than that $42 line. On the positive side, if you look at the left side there and see how it compares to our peers, it's still a very affordable rate relative to our neighbors. Alexandria, as a matter of fact, just recently proposed an increase of $49 this year. They went out for a new contract. It's bad timing with the markets, and so theirs is going up quite a bit. A little bit more on recycling. The recycling market is changing rapidly. We experienced that when we kind of led the way on glass. So our stance is this. We're going to continue to monitor the market on a monthly basis. We're trying to analyze the best way to spend county resources We really need to be agile to respond to the changing markets. However, new processing plants and receiving plants don't just stand up quickly. We're hoping that the market responds, but what works today may not work tomorrow, and we kind of need to balance the short-term realities with our long-term waste goals. So, as a first step toward a more comprehensive update of the solid waste master plan, as directed by the manager, we're going to be performing an initial high-level assessment of the market conditions and the contractual opportunities and challenges there to help inform the policy framework and the environmental and economic trade-offs as we enter the longer-term update. A couple quick notes on glass. Our community has been really responsive. Residents have taken nearly 1.5 million pounds of glass to the county drop-off sites. Those 5 locations that we put throughout the county have been really convenient and effective for our citizens. And also, it's been a regional dynamic. Now, we kind of led the way, but now regionally, there's 28 glass drop-off locations in 8 different Northern Virginia locations. So that's been a success story. We kind of led the way on. Okay, so the new ARC contract is funded at $4.4 million higher than in the budget this year. The total contract cost will be $17.9 million for '21. So our new service providers, First Transit, they started December 29th. You see that on the little red asterisk, they're showing new contract. They're fully staffed, buses are available, which helps at on-time performance, particular rollout, and we really look forward to moving ART in the right direction. The stats and trends matter. So for ridership, if you look on the left side there, last March we began an upward climb and is currently at 10% higher compared to the same period the previous year. On-time performance on the right appears to be rebounding after several years of decline. The goal is 90%. However, service was hovering in the mid-70s for most of the last year when we're having the other problems. So our transit team is working really closely with the new provider to push it closer to the goal. If you see that kind of upward sweep on that bottom right there after the red asterisk, that's the direction we're heading. We just got the latest stats for February, and on-time performance is up to 80% for the month of February, and that's a trend that's really good, and we hope to continue that upslope to get back to where we want to be. Also, not on this slide, but within the transit realm is the metro dynamic. You may have heard that WMATA has unfortunately proposed cutting several productive route segments in Arlington, such as the Pentagon to Farragut connections on the 16 C&E lines running along the Pike, and the 22 line connecting Fairlane to the Pentagon. So staff are hopeful that WMATA will restore some of those proposed cuts, and the manager has set aside some funding to account for any restored routes. So Jason Freese will brief that separately as part of the WMATA budget in a later briefing on April 2nd. Hopefully we'll know more by then what the dynamic is. Because transit is such an important service in our community, we chose ART for an examination of how we're doing with our commitment to equity. Fortunately, we've benefited in this area from several decades of guidance and oversight from Title VI, which was designed, of course, with equity in mind. So we applied the 4 questions to ART, and it kind of suggests we're on the right track. We benefit both transit-dependent and choice riders, and we carefully consider impacts to low-income, minority, and disabled members of our community, and those with limited English proficiency whenever we consider service or rate changes. So that deliberative process over many years helps us get to where we want to be and make sure no one's left behind. I think the best way to demonstrate our success is a map, shown on the next slide. And as Ms. Crystal mentioned the other day, it's not just a simple north-south thing, but it shows a little more complex picture. So this map shows the concentrations of minority, and the way we categorize minority for purposes of this map is non-white populations in the county. And then there's an overlay of the ART and Metro bus routes, respectively displayed in green for ART and blue for Metro. So if you look at the legend, like the red areas, the deep red areas, are greater than 60% minority or non-white areas. The thickness of the green and blue lines indicates the level of bus service or frequencies. The thicker the line, the higher the frequency, and you can see according to the legend on the right there, the headways. So while it's a little tricky to take all this in and see the combined overlaid effects of heavy ART and Metro, we like, for example, like on the Pike, you can see the dash line where you got both of them running concurrently. There's a clear demonstration, if you look at the thickness of the line and the number of lines, that we have a higher level of service to our minority populations in the county. So that's a really good thing. And so while public transits agencies and providers follow the federal Title VI equity guidelines in our service planning, there's other things that go into it. There's the use of the type of equipment, the locations and type of transit infrastructure, actual demand, of course, because we have to be productive in our routes on how the need is met. So the map you see shows not just the coverage in the area with higher minority population, but also through those lenses indicates that there's a high demand for those services. So we're really we believe in the transit area doing a great job on both fronts. Another thing not shown on the slide, but I want to talk about a little bit with equity, is our civic engagement. On our civic engagement side, it's been a high priority for us to gather as many diverse voices on our projects and our services. So this past year, Jessica and our communications and engagement staff, along with individual project managers and so forth, have complemented all of our public processes with pop-ups in the community that attract a diverse cross-section of people that would not normally come to the traditional evening or night meeting, in-person engagements. So they've attended the immunization clinics at DHS, gone to AFAG, gone to the Community Progress Network things, faith-based organizations, farmers markets, and larger festivals like the Hispanic Heritage Festival and the Columbia Pike Blues Fest. So there's a trade-off in that where you're reaching who you need to, but people who want to do the traditional method still want to do the traditional method. And we've got limited resources. So right now, we're deliberately shifting our attention the other direction, and you might hear some feedback on the other side. So we'll continue that strategy, and we'll make sure we get to the right people. On the training side, Mike Collins has been our rep on the GARE cohort, and Mike's been really great about bringing us back information and starting our own internal challenging conversations, as well as conversations with his own teams on the operations side. And we are early in our journey for our entire department. We're trying to figure out how best to reach our own unique and diverse set of employees, and coordinating, of course, with the countywide strategy for a common understanding. Okay, so back to a little more detail on the individual requests. We're asking for $300,000 ongoing for concrete maintenance and $300,000 for a sidewalk condition assessment one time. The $300,000 ongoing funding would double the general fund budget for concrete maintenance, which currently does about 50 or 60 repair jobs. Context here and quantity is really important. We have over 800 miles of sidewalk, curb and gutter. 300,000 would replace just over a mile. So you can do the math that it's a pretty small percentage on a total basis. So we have to get informed. In the condition assessment, we'll propose a strategy and timing once we know basically what we're dealing with. So right now, we only know what we know, which is what people call in or we see, or what they plug in on public stuff, and we have a backlog. Right now, we're handling about 500 or 600 requests per year, and we're really not meeting our community's expectations for safe walking conditions. Tying back to the equities slide, from an equity standpoint, we don't know if some areas are worse than others. So we got to figure it out. The pictures here on the lower right show the conditions we routinely see from subsidence, whether it's undermining from a drainage structure or just settling, or the more common uplift from tree roots. Of course, because we want it all in this community, great trees and sidewalks that are smooth and accessible at all times, it really requires constant investment and maintenance. So we have various methods to fix those things, from grinding, if it just needs a little bit, we grind them down, to asphalt patches, to mud or foam jacking where we can lift them back up, to just straight up replacement of the panels and segments that need it. So our next request is in C3, or Customer Care and Communications, which Wei Huang and her team do a great job on. is currently only staffed with one traffic engineer. And Andrea Wilkinson is amazing, but she can only keep up with the demand and so many hours a day, no matter how proficient she is. And then when she can't keep up, that it causes delayed responses, and it kind of breaks that trust with the customer. So we get about 600 emails a month for residents, and we take action on more than 80 of those monthly that turn into something. Most of those, about 60, can be resolved through our C3 officer by checking existing data, checking the existing standards, seeing, oh, we've already looked at that, these were the results, the previous records. Then there's another 20 out of those 80 that are new, and they require full investigation. Starting from data collection, they involve multiple staff or even teams, a certain amount of design effort, and they take about 4 to 9 months to complete. So it's a lot to take care of, and we really consider this an important part of achieving Vision Zero and safety in the right-of-way, because it's people coming to us to tell us what they're seeing out there, and we want to eliminate the hazard before something bad happens to one of our citizens. And then finally, at the bottom there, we budgeted for the differential salary cost for an assistant bureau chief for the very, very busy T&O bureau. Next, streetlights and core services. So when we originally came to the board in FY18 with a request for staffing, we were given 3 FTEs, which we greatly appreciate. As a result, we were able to reduce the time to address major repairs from 120 days down to 45. For minor repairs, we dropped the time from 30 to 15. If you look at the bottom here, you'll notice that major repairs ticked up a bit back in 19, but those were due to issues with our contractor, which have since been resolved. So, with the addition of 2 more positions, we believe we can reduce major repairs to just 30 days and minor repairs to 7 days, which again is focused on improving public safety. The engineer that's requested would also provide more bandwidth for several things, including the pace of development that we're seeing, because I get into that review cycle. Coordination with Dominion Energy, who's also improved their response time. And now the new dynamic since 18, where we now have to deal with private permitting and coordination with 5G on our poles, which is a whole nother new dynamic. And we're also trying to, the engineer would also help with our initiatives for small projects to simplify the ownership zones laid out in our streetlight management plan. Then finally, this includes a vehicle for the streetlight technician. That enables the streetlight crew to form, and each crew needs a vehicle. Preventive maintenance of our facilities is really what makes them available, comfortable, and safe at a desired high level for our citizens, staff, and visitors. So we do preventive maintenance, or PM, by both contract and in-house. This funding will enable our team to get done more of the things that we aren't getting to. Things like regular roof drain inspections, emergency generator maintenance, fire extinguisher inspection, sump pump and grease trap inspections and testing, garage drain cleaning, overhead door and fall protection system preventive maintenance. Not doing that type of work can result in unhappy surprises, unplanned closings or partial closings, safety problems, and sometimes very costly corrective maintenance. On the environmental side, our community energy plan implementation framework is still planned for June of this year. While we are not yet recommending specific priorities for consultant studies, we know we will need some. We have an amazing staff, but they can't know everything in this dynamic and sometimes very technical space. So the 150K request could support a range of deeper dives in areas such as these, ranging from EV strategies to microgrids. We're also proposing an aggressive stance to electrification in our sedan fleets where it's currently very feasible. The $46,000 annually requested represents our best estimate for the incremental ongoing maintenance and replacement of the 28 sedans. To be perfectly clear, we used existing balances in the auto fund now, this fiscal year. We are already on the path to spend $341,000 of one-time funds to pay the premium for purchasing the new EV vehicles and the charging infrastructure. We're working with procurement right now, and I'm told things are progressing well. Once we've executed the contract, then it'll probably be like 3 to 4 months to actually fill the order and get the vehicles. Some stats. After adding these 28 vehicles, we will increase our non-public safety sedan fleet percentage from 5 to 24%. So from 5 to 24%. So going at it really aggressively this year. As we bring on the new, much larger Rubber Run Community Center this fall, we need to make the appropriate adjustments on our baseline maintenance budgets to cover the full range of contracts, operations and maintenance, from custodial services to fire sprinkler maintenance and intrusion detection to elevator maintenance. So the old facility was 19,000 square feet. The new one is over 100,000 square feet when you add up the 53,000 of the building and over 49 in the garage. This request also covers the incremental in-house labor for a building engineer and one time for a maintenance vehicle. That is a summary of the general fund requests.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel. I imagine there are a few questions here. Who would like to go first? Katie? I think, I was thinking we might do E2C2 later. Let me see, Mr. Bloom, would you like to speak now, or would you like to wait till we finish the stormwater fund?
I can speak after stormwater.
Okay, that's fine, because that's what I thought. So we can ask him later, too. Yeah, we can. Go ahead. Question? Mr. DiFranti, Matt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's see. The manager won't be surprised. Is this the right time to ask about stop sign, painted lines with respect to stop signs? Because the sidewalks is a new investment and important, but
There's no bad time to ask a question.
but I'm trying to be,
No.
some tangential relation to the subject. So.
No, I'm going to we ask Wei to come up, and she's probably going to tell you what she has told you in the past.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
So I assume you're asking the Mark a stop bar at every stop sign location issue. And we know this has been raised by at least 2 communities before. And after considering the safety impact or the perceived potential safety impact, we actually think this can be a project supported by our infrastructure. The reason being, although there's no known documented benefit, we can see how with added visibility of the stop control can benefit the county as a whole. Although if you do the county as a whole, the cost is not insignificant. When you actually divided that to each individual intersection, we think the investment is worth it. So this is already planned in this marking season. We're waiting for the budget approval to give us the go-ahead. So we can't do the whole county all at once.
Sure. If it's in the budget, I just didn't catch it at that detail, and so.
It is.
If it's somewhere in here, that's great.
It is part of the safety improvement, actually CIP is part of the safety improvement CIP budget.
Got it. So we'll see it then. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the answer to the question is over to you. That's great. All right. Katie?
Sure. Maybe I can do 1 or 2, and then I'll yield the floor. So first, with the assessment of the recycling program that's underway this year, it was brought to my attention recently, I think actually a couple of months before Mr. Dorsey and I joined the board, so almost everybody is new since then, the board adopted a zero waste goal. So I'm wondering, I know at the time just reviewing that resolution, there was going to be the development of a zero waste plan, which I'm not sure I've seen. When we talk about our assessment of the recycling program underway this year, how, if at all, would that zero waste resolution factor into it?
Well, I would just try to go back to the manager's letter where he tried to talk about how, given the dynamic conditions, we're trying to do an initial assessment of this very dynamic condition and provide that first to then determine before we launch into a full-blown plan. So we know that it has to be done. I can't remember what page that's on in the budget, but there's a periodic update done to the solid waste management plan, and we're on track to be able to do that in time. But we really kind of got to get our arms along the long-range picture that's evolving from the market conditions first.
I wanted to add something to that, and then I tried to avoid getting on a soapbox, but here I go. So the zero waste plan, which is something I think, and I'm trying to remember what year that was adopted.
2015.
Yeah, 2015. Has in it moving towards a situation where a specific resident wouldn't actually be putting a lot of waste into the waste stream.
Exactly. That's why I'm
So,
asking.
and that, yeah, and I think that that's something that we've had some preliminary conversations on it. The kind of change I actually think it's change in behavior more than anything else that's involved in that, is a big lift for any community. And so what I wanted to start with was focusing on our recycling program. We have spent a lot of time over the last 10 or 15 years, I think rightfully so, focusing on our recycling rate. And I think that as we've run into difficulties with glass and other kinds of commodities, I think in some ways, we're missing the bigger picture, which is that we may be doing really well on recycling, and this gets us into the zero waste conversation. If we're recycling things that by themselves have a big carbon footprint, why bother is sort of my attitude. Don't quote, it's sort of
No,
like,
I'm hearing.
if we have, and this is a really, just a made-up example. If you have a can of Pepsi that was manufactured in Washington State, driven across the country, then put in some impenetrable plastic kind of container, then opened at a grocery store, and then brought home, and then you put it in your blue bin, people feel really like they've done something good. Well, they haven't. They've actually done the exact opposite of that. So that's why I want to try to get our resources focused on that bigger question. So we didn't quite use the term zero waste, but that is what we're doing and relooking at the recycling program. That's the beginning of that.
That is really exciting. So when you say relooking at the recycling program, that is in fact the assessment of the market and contractual opportunities and challenges, or is it a separate stream?
Well, it's part of it. Right now, we have a contract that is through what year? 2024, 2025, and we have some good prices on it. But the contract allows us to do food scraps and a whole series of other things. But the market has changed so much that we need to look at new kinds of opportunities, maybe parsing out parts of the waste stream in different ways. So a lot of work to do on that. We haven't given up on zero waste, but I really do think that the conditions have changed. So we have to, I don't want to say start again, but
it
start
does
somewhere.
seem to me, if I could, and I'm with you on the soapbox, and I'm delighted to hear the level of passion that you bring to it as well, because if the conditions, to the extent to which the conditions have changed, and I think this slide with the recycling processing revenue really underscores that, if anything, those conditions have only thrown into sharper relief the need to keep things out of our disposal stream, whether it's recycling or waste. So I just want to make sure that we don't, as we are assessing those changing conditions, we're not missing a huge opportunity, whether it is a very big lift of public education or something else. So it's helpful to know that you share the passion for it. And I think just wanting to make sure that that really does show up in the assessment or the plans that we're doing, that we're not focused just on that kind of changing cost of disposing something in one stream relative to another. If I could ask one more question before yielding the floor?
Absolutely. I wanted to just align myself with everything that's been said. I think we really need to examine recycling. I think we're sometimes fooling ourselves that we're not always recycling as we need to. So thanks for
And thinking about how
pointing that
we
out.
can, as government, support citizens who might want
Right,
to make different choices.
right. A lot of education to do, I think. Go ahead.
So I want to maybe open some questions, I imagine my colleagues may as well, to really unpack those costs associated with the Lubber Run Community Center. So I suspect I was possibly not the only one that blanched at that nearly $1 million figure, given that this does not include any of the Parks and Recreation staff who will actually be on site at the facility. So I'm going to see if I can sneak in two questions here to get at I'm trying to understand that. First is, do we have at hand what we spent at the previous Lubber Run Community Center, recognizing it's considerably smaller facility, but just for maybe a frame of reference. And then beyond that, can you just even be beyond the extent to which it was highlighted in the presentation. Just break down a little more about like why, for example, we need $140,000 just for the garage administration, what a full-time employee does just on that one site. So again, comparison to previous, and then more breakdown.
Just as a point of reference, and I think it's definitely worthy of follow-up, when we opened Arlington Mill, the related cost for that facility, for maintenance, workers, for employees, for non-personnel facility, utilities, that's a big part of it. Remember that this number is water, sewer, electric, includes that as well. And parking garage was just over $1 million, actually closer to 1.1 million. The parking garage contract there was $170,000 a year. And we are mimicking the hours at Lubber Run with Arlington Mill on the same staffing structure, the same fee structure, meaning 4 hours free, that whole, we're just applying that across the board. And then the non-personnel stuff at Arlington Mill was around $700,000, and then the staffing, the maintenance, because these are, it has a fitness center, a big fitness component, so it'll be open early, 6 a.m. to, with the maintenance workers. So that gives, just to give you a sense of what that, as a comparator, it's not that far off. But I think Greg can chime in more specifically on Lubber Run too.
And I'm showing in my notes that we spent about $40,000 annually at Lubber Run previously. When we add on new facilities, we find out the new facilities are actually more complex in their maintenance and so forth because of the systems that we try to be, uber energy efficient, and the new systems, there's typically.
What was the number for the old Lubber Run?
I was, and maybe Tyler can correct me, I'm showing about $40,000 annually.
Can be for
I don't think
utilities
so.
and staffing. That's
Yeah,
impossible.
and that's probably just one component.
Tyler's going to gently correct her.
Yeah, exactly.
I think just for facilities, the existing was about 259,000, but we can get you follow-up to confirm.
Yeah, see if we can dig in more of that. But, the custodial adds up, the longer hours adds up, the utilities adds up, all these new systems, there were no elevators in the old Lubber Run. So all those things start to add up, larger fire protection systems, everything. In some cases, those older buildings didn't have systems, and the new buildings do. It all adds up.
I think another good metric will be some of the schools' costs, because when they opened up Fleet, it was like 1.5, I think, and square footage is not that far off. Hours of operation are more limited there. Do you know what I mean? It's a little bit, just, there'd be some other comps like that. I think that would be really helpful.
Oh, I think so, 'cause probably we all could use a better understanding of what it actually costs to run
Maybe
these
all the more
buildings.
reason to pursue that solar panels idea on Lubber Run, right? We
Right,
built
which I
that to
like.
be solar ready, so now we can drive down those utility costs potentially. All right.
Okay, anything else? Are you good for now? All right, well, Christian, Mr. Dorsey.
Sure, thank you, Ms. Garvey. Let's go to art for a little while and transit. And first of all, just let me say, Mr. Emanuel, I really appreciated your adhering to the board's budget guidance to look at a line of business from an equity perspective. I think you really did a good job of that with the transit piece, asking and answering and assessing the 4 questions. And I particularly appreciated looking at sidewalks as a sort of corollary where the work or the data is not necessarily there to deliver the same kind of report.
Right.
And understanding full well how so many things are interconnected. Most people who use transit are heavily reliant on the condition of sidewalks to assess said transit. It
Exactly.
begins to build a thinking in the organization, and I think you're off to a great start. So let me just commend you on that. With art specifically, I'm a little curious as to how this works, where we're expecting decreased fare revenue in the upcoming year, despite the fact that we're projecting slightly increased ridership on art in line with trends of further improvement.
I'll make it more details from other, but I think we basically are basing on actuals. So it's a budget year to budget year, and how I think we overshot where we were going to be this year. We're not at revenue that we thought we were going to be. So we're trying to adjust based on actuals.
Got it.
While we're still going the right trend. Is there anything else, Lynn, you want to add?
That captures it.
Okay.
So basically, the 3.195 million trips that we were expecting in this fiscal, we're going to come at some level below that.
Exactly.
Okay.
In
All
the
right.
revenue.
And that's affected the future year projection. Got it. Moving on to STAR, and I note that on Web 420 that we're seeing decrease in the number of the trend over the past few years, a significant decrease in the number of STAR trips. which you've explained somewhat in the shift from Red Top serving a lot of those passengers, but we're seeing an increase, or at least an increase over the trend of the last few years in Metro Access trips. And it's long been my understanding that Star provided a significant competitive advantage over Metro Access, so I'm kind of surprised to see that. Do we have any sense as to why?
I'm going to call on maybe Lynn or Dennis if they have a sense on that.
Hi, Ms. Rivers.
Hi, good afternoon. So yeah, that actually is a new trend for us. What we've been seeing is the fact that we've had some issues with the service provider, with Red Top. So some of that could have been attributed to that. There's been a combination of things, but we're also seeing a trend where people are actually using fixed route more as well. So our hope is that they continue to stay on Star and/or ride ART or Metrobus and not use Metro Access services as much.
I mean, historically, the share of, Arlington's payment towards Metro Access has been quite small because of the presence of Star, but at least current trends are indicating that that number is going to creep up a little bit.
Yes.
So do we have any strategies beyond hope? And I don't mean to be pejorative there, but do we have any concrete strategies to see that number not continue to go up, because that's just going to get pricier and pricier?
One of the things that's on our work program for this calendar year is to rebid the call center contract to get some new technology into the Star call center so that we're delivering a higher level of service and hopefully managing that Metro Access back down again.
Okay. Well, I know that there are some Star customers and maybe some Star former customers who are going to be happy to hear that due to some issues with dispatching and call scheduling. So I'll look forward to keeping in touch as that work develops. I'll yield the floor for right now.
I was just going to do a
but I am gonna have
follow-up if I'm,
multiple rounds.
no, that's fine. I'd just like to do a follow-up on these issues. When you were talking about the bus cuts with WMATA, I don't think you mentioned, I think it's the 7Y. I just wanted to make sure in case we're aware of that one too. Ms. Rivers, because, I mean, these are just really successful, important cuts, and it's going to be a tremendous burden if they cut these routes.
We've heard from the community. We've actually looked at all of the cuts that's been proposed and have already reached out to WMATA and have opposed practically all of the cuts that's been recommended. There's been some that's been recommended to increase on weekends. Our concern is we don't want to substitute a reduction of weekday service just to increase weekends when we've got some very, very productive service on the weekday that's being proposed to be cut.
Yeah, I think we would permanently lose passengers if we do that, and I appreciate it. And I know you've been working with NVTC, I think, and MBTA on, regionally, we've been working on that too, and I appreciate that. One last question on the community engagement, and I think it's great that you're trying all of these different ways, not traditional, to reach people that kind of haven't been able to participate very well. I'm assuming we're still doing like online though, because that's easy, because you said some people aren't getting what they're used to. And I just wanted to, actually, just an affirmative answer is fine. What you were referring to is we're doing fewer of like the big group meetings that people kind of self-select for.
Right, we are definitely doing more online.
Yeah, that's right.
And we are pretty aggressive on that, and we also try to collect the right amount of data so we can figure out more. It's sometimes relying on people to volunteer their information, but we also try to get certain demographic information so that we can see trends and collect it. So it's that makes it really convenient when you can get that online because you can see things over time.
No, that's great. I think a lot of the people who use the traditional methods, they can do online, but the other folks that don't traditionally do that probably maybe don't even do online. So I'm glad we're making extra effort to reach out to them. Thank you. That was all I had on a little follow-up there. Mr. DeFranti?
Sure. So first, I just think I want to just remind myself, and a big thank you to everyone who's here and those who are doing the work, because 3 or 4 months ago we sat in this boardroom and we recognized some heroes who helped fix huge pipes. And since then, innumerable work has been done, and it's not done in the limelight. And I think all of us, at least for my part, I really want to thank the people that work for you and you leading them. So sorry, that's just a bit of positivity that I had to put in there. So. On the budget, I do also want to thank the electric vehicles going from 5% to 24%. Big thank you there. the street safety way and your team, my goodness, I'm really supportive of that. I'll jump on a different soapbox that the manager will have good fun with, which is before the 27th. 27th I've set aside to ride the bus all day. I'm tired of mentioning it, and I want to actually do it every route to the extent I can. And so I would love an update on the lengths of the buses. One day, Dennis, you'll be able to get me clear on this, but I would love an update on that just so that I understand it. I apologize. The last I will say, I think one other board member has mentioned I support painting the buses, not for the census, but I just think it's at this moment, given the climate change, go clean with art is natural gas is no longer, in my view, a clean fuel. So I don't see that in there, and I'll follow up offline. I don't know that this is the best forum, but I do feel that, and I don't know if there's if you have a thought there, Mr. Emanuel, that's great.
We've definitely had a lot of thoughts in this area. The important thing for us over the past year, because we had a problem with our art contractor, and we learned a lot from that. We incorporated the changes into the new contract. But that's a challenging and difficult process to do a source selection, get your contract just right. We needed to get art back grounded into a good place. And that was our focus.
Sure.
And required a lot of bandwidth of the team. Meanwhile, the community energy plan was going on, and the clear direction from the board was there to look at electrification of buses. And now that art is stabilizing, we've had discussions with our team to start looking at how we might get a pilot electric bus vehicle. And of course, we know on the school sides, they're also hopefully going to get their two from Dominion. We're in close relationship with Alexandria and seeing on how their EV test is going. We're fortunate enough to swipe Pierre from them. He's on our team, so there's still a good relationship there. So we're engaged in that space now and starting to shift our attention to there now that we've got art kind of back on the right footing that needed to be on.
Great. Well, you're clearly focusing on the right big picture things. On a side note, I do wonder if just painting over that's something I support. I'll just say that. We can follow up. And I'm mindful of those.
Ms. Garvey, if I could just add, if you could just explain the painting concept, I'm unfamiliar with it.
Sure. I'm sorry not to be clear. So, natural gas, I think, there's a whole argument about it as a bridge fuel, and I'm not saying that it's terrible per se, but on our buses it says, natural gas. I think it says "Go clean with art," and I think at this moment, given the pace of climate change, that a natural gas bus is less clean than it was 8 years ago when we painted buses. So my vote would be just to paint over that, so that we're not saying that we're phenomenal anymore. Not that we weren't great 5 years ago, but just at this moment, I just don't think natural gas is a clean enough fuel for Australia was on fire. So I think that things have changed, so that's what I would say.
You think it says go green?
Go green, excuse me.
Right, and relative to a single occupancy vehicle, it is a very green choice.
Yeah, I think that's true. I would just say, even still, I think it's worth it for one board member's viewpoint. So I'll yield the floor.
I'll just say there's probably some carbon footprint involved in repainting before we need to. Just throwing it out there, but that's okay. Thank you, Mr. DeFranti. All right. Anything else, or shall I go to
I'll
Ms.
have
Crystal?
one or two other, but go on.
All right. Katie, you ready to go again?
All right, I am. Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the things I just wanted to really be clear about throughout the budget, and then I think, or the DS budget, and then most clearly in the summary page on Web 471, it references additional employees allocated as part of fiscal 2019 closeout. I had an opportunity to talk to the manager. It's been clarified for me, but I really think it bears emphasizing for anybody who may be watching this and follows along with our budget process that we do not allocate new employees with closeout money or one-time money ever. And I think it's just really important to note, and this may be no more than a nod unless I get it wrong, in which case you can correct me, that those employees were included in the fiscal 20 budget proposal as as sort of general employees and development services to support increased work associated with Amazon. And then it was during our closeout process or just our budget update conversation last November that we formally agreed that this is how the money would be spent. It was not allocated during closeout.
That is correct. To remind you, in the fiscal 20 budget, I had proposed essentially about $800,000 of funds that were set aside to meet, of ongoing funds to meet additional demands related to Amazon and development. And we have come back to the board on 2 occasions, and we allocated funds out of that appropriation for 5 additional staff. 3 of them, I think, are in DES, and that's what's reflected here. What happened in closeout, we scratched out whatever X was, and we made it X plus 3 is in the FTE count. That was a bookkeeping notation. And then those funds that weren't allocated out of that pot of money were simply rolled into this year's budget and redivvied up. We didn't use all the 800,000.
Okay, great. I think it maybe just bears a note for future budget preparation to the extent we can really be clear that those types of employees were allocated in that regular budget process. We're not doling out ongoing costs in one-time money. So similarly about those employees, I think best reflected in the development services budget. I'm looking at Web 423 here. This is, I guess, an accounting question as much as anything else. Generally, I think of those employees in development services as recouping their costs through permit fees, et cetera, particularly when it came to Amazon. And yet the net tax support is increasing this year. So can you help us understand a little bit how those folks are being paid for and where the development fees come through?
Well, I'll just say simply that the development fees that are coming through, as you indicated, don't necessarily pay for the whole thing. I think that there's going to be a broader effort to do a fee study to kind of normalize where we're at. But for this year, we're just proposing the 2.5%.
Okay.
Let me be a little bit more emphatic about that. We do not charge fees at the correct level. We are in the process of doing a study. Many of our fees were added over the course of 30 years in a bit of a haphazard fashion. And so we will be coming back, hopefully by this time next year. We've actually awarded a contract for a consultant to come in and look at the fees here in Department of Environmental Services and in CPHD to make sure there is a consistent logic with all of them.
Okay. All right. So then we should understand these employees, the cost of these employees is being partially offset by fees, but okay. I'll just emphasize the importance of the work that sounds like it's already underway. I really hope we'll have something to consider next year. I think the notion that we're using tax support, general fund revenue to pay for the development costs of projects that will often be very remunerative for whomever is proceeding with them is disconcerting. I'm glad to hear that fees are going up at least 2.5%, but I hope next year we'll have some consideration to.
I would use a different word than disconcerting. I would find it annoying, if not offensive on a certain level, but we need to, the important thing is we need to have a basis for doing it, because we can't simply go back to the development community and say, by the way, you know, we've been charging you these numbers and we got it wrong, and just take our word for it and we're going to double it. We need to have that work done.
Yeah, and hopefully by next year we'll be. Okay, my only other question was with regard to our commuter choice program and the efforts that they have underway with our Arlington transportation partners. This is about the performance measures that we use. So definitely a lot of interesting data in there about the number of capital bike share bikes that we're seeing, pledges taken, and so forth, but those all really strike me as outputs, right, activities, and what I think the really interesting question is the outcomes, which is basically what is the modal split for our Arlington Transportation Partners? Do we collect that data, and if not, could we start?
We have different segregates, so this really does track the activities of the program, but where we really see the performance is when we're collecting both building level data, area data. For example, part of commuter services, we collect after studies for every single site plan and use permit this board approves. And what we see, and we just got another batch that came in the last couple of weeks, is that, yes, these programs are having a dramatic impact of lowering single-occupant vehicle travel. For example, some multifamily buildings that we now have surveys for in Pentagon State, Crystal City, roughly 21% of their commute trips are by vehicle. The rest are transit, walking, biking. And so we are having a fairly dramatic impact on community performance kind of at large.
So if I may, Mr. Lee, are these in an annual report, or can a report be generated for us? Because I think we'd all love to take
Dig into it.
a look at it all.
The answer is yes. We are specifically doing that for 22202. And we intended to roll that out as part of all the related studies late spring, early summer. But we can certainly share all of our research with the board.
Yeah, that would be great. I think because, we want to be the greatest ambassadors of this work. So having that data, I think, would be terrific.
helpful. And I think just in general, I mean, we've talked about this before when we talk about these measures, really wanting to see not inputs, right, not hours spent or brochures distributed, but actually what outcomes are we getting. And I suspect, knowing the success of ATP, which you've just indicated towards Mr. Leach, the outputs information or outcomes information is actually very good. So it'd be great to see that in the budget going forward, and to the extent you have something you can share with us during this process, that'd be great as well.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Mr. Dorsey?
Thank you. A couple of areas. So one, the pavement condition index, and I'm referencing the numbers that we're seeing on Web 450 here. And I note that we've hit a little bit of a plateau with the condition as measured on the PCI, and also a plateau in the amount of lane miles that we're paving. Am I to intuit then that we think that this is a comfortable place for us to be?
We think we're about in the right sweet spot right now, but I think that will be further borne out by the next time we survey the community and see if they agree with us.
Okay. I will say, just in looking at these numbers, it seems like, the benefit of having the mild winters that we've had over the last couple of years, and knock on wood, this one, I guess, is not yet quite done, but it seems like you would expect that in these years, we would actually see an improvement in the level of pavement conditions so that, our money stretches further, but I might be looking at that wrong since I am certainly not an expert.
I think we have to also lay this out versus the funding amounts, because last CIP, we did reduce paving because, we had a very constrained CIP given schools and Metro. And so I think if we take a multi-year look, and then there was a period of time where we really increased and we used some one-time money. So I think it's exactly the right question to ask. I think we need to look at it not only from weather, asphalt costs, as well as, you know what I mean, the funding that's gone into it in that trend. But we can do that.
I'll look forward to that. Thank you. And the other area I wanted to explore was going back to municipal solid waste. So referencing web pages 453 and 54. First, just these things catch my eye, but I think at the bottom, the table, instead of total pounds of MSW, should be total tons. Yeah. Just in case we're not that good in Arlington County. But then the larger question concerns the glass recycling, and I'm just spitballing an idea here to get a response for it, because this is one of the things that does drive me crazy. There's such a market mismatch here, and I think we've proceeded very prudently in how we've approached segmenting or encouraging the segmenting of glass into drop-off centers and letting people know the reality so that they can make their own decisions about reuse, or, whether to keep it in the recycling carts or to put it into the black carts. But there still is that yearning from our community to get back to having glass recycled. And, there are people who are recycling the glass, and, as close as North Carolina is my understanding. And I would imagine that since this is an opportunity, I'm wondering to what extent government can encourage, solicit, whether they are new entrepreneurial initiatives to actually, do glass pickup. And I'm not just talking about in Arlington, but, across all of Virginia. It seems like this is a great opportunity for somebody to get in on potentially a business opportunity to to actually match the needs of communities, which is to recycle with the recycling facilities that are within a relatively easy drive. And I'm grasping at straws here, but it just seems like it's something that could happen.
We too are hopeful that the market will shift and that we can get a glass recycling facility within striking distance. You're correct. The current one that's closest is in Wilson, North Carolina. And we're actually trying to scrub the numbers there to see if that makes sense or not, if we're, large truckloads to go down there and see if that makes sense. So we're hopeful that given this market, the millions of people that live here, that something could come forth. We're also trying to take a collective approach on this. Eric Grabowski, our solid waste bureau chief, is really active regionally with his compatriots to see if, through COG or some other way that we can reach out to industry collectively and say, look, we can bring you this many tons. Let's talk. So I think, we've got the right dynamics going there, but those results aren't going to happen overnight.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, this region, I think, has a really tremendous recycling rate region-wide, so it seems like we do have an attractive product to offer some enterprising, either business, worker cooperative, or something of that sort to actually take advantage of a key opportunity to, perhaps seize a market which is very dynamic, but also to serve a community need. Off my soapbox.
No, that's all right. Mr. Moon.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to this is just to add on to one detail that Greg has said is that actually Eric Grabowski is working not only with COG, but other jurisdictions in the Northern Virginia region to look at the potential of citing potential MRF, because that's one of the problems. We don't have, and if we could do that, whether that's done privately or whether that's done publicly to incentivize opportunities where we could be in more control and incentivize markets, that's being looked at directly, and our solid waste bureau chief is really involved with that regionally. That's all I was going to add.
And Madam Chair, if I just can, with a very brief comment, I just want to congratulate you all. The organics waste going from a quarter in the trash to, a little over 1%. That seems as close to zero as is humanly possible. I don't know what you're doing, what's happening, but thanks to you, thanks to our community, I think that's a really great number.
Like, the hats go off to not, like you said, the community, but I call out Shani and Adam who are here. Eric's not here today, but Shani Krozak and Adam Ardell here. They are very aggressive out there in the community with this.
No, that's great. I want to go back to the glass pickup, and I'll just say a neighbor came up to me in Fairlington, which is, compact, said, there's some kids, and they're thinking they could start a business collecting everybody's glass bottles, and they're even thinking they could work this out, and I encouraged her to look at it. I mean, I just think there are some real opportunities there, and, I think regional cooperation is absolutely crucial to this for the centers, and maybe a public-private partnership or something. We really, I'm glad we're looking at it. I wish we could have done it earlier, but I think it's clear that we need to be making a lot of changes, and I'm glad that we're on it. Mr. DeFranti.
Sure. So my question is also not stunning. It's about the AIR program and webpage 445. I wondered, there's a movement towards some consulting services, which is, the outside expertise is great. I'm interested in the infrastructure that we would want to build over time as we continue to ramp up towards the 2025 and then 2035 goals. And I don't know if you had any thoughts about, certainly mindful, you can get outside expertise, that's great, but over 2-3 years, I wonder if if there'd been any thought to adding capacity, because we will need to, over time, really grow this work. And so I don't know if that's a question for you or if you thought about that at all.
Well, I think first of all, we need to give you our implementation framework, and then that will inform our strategy. And oftentimes these things don't perfectly fit with the budget cycles. But my experience, I'll just tell you my experience as far as that when we have a resource disconnect, even if it's not right at the time of budget, we sometimes have flexibility to do things. And the manager has been very supportive of me when I've brought to him to a one-time thing or an opportunity that's outside of a budget cycle. We also have ability to do a temporary overstrength position or something if we need a particular expertise that's particularly important at a certain time and we're able to get that resource. So I understand and hear what you're saying, but until we're a little more certain on where we're going, I wouldn't commit to something that I'm not sure on yet.
I did want to add one thing to that, and I think we've talked about this privately, so I mentioned this publicly, which is that I'm not prepared to let any opportunity pass us by, okay? So if we need to add additional consulting resources, one of the reasons why you very generously set aside a $2 million contingent for me is to handle situations where something comes up where we literally need to jump on it immediately. And the addition of ongoing staff is something that we will look at, and that is not a panacea because you actually have to go out and advertise and hire someone. And even when you do that, you may not have a person that has the specific expertise in that area. So I do not want anybody in the committee to think, the community to think that there's going to be an opportunity that comes up that we somehow will let pass by for failing to do the analysis on it.
Sure, that's great. Hope you understand why I asked the question regarding capacity. And then the only other item I'll just make as a comment on the solid waste that Ms. Crystal and others have mentioned. I just want an update. I think that it's sort of on a process piece. Educating the community does seem like a really key goal on recycling. And there's a mix of, I think that I just love an update on the composting piece and then on the glass recycling centers. And you don't have to do that now, but whenever is appropriate, it seems as though changes in the way we do things can help educate people. Just, when we put the new recycling, the glass recycling items out there, that led to some turn, which I feel like helped with the conversations. And so I'd love an update on that at the appropriate time.
Okay. All right, colleagues, are we ready to move on to Utilities Fund? I think we are. Yep.
All right, thank you. All right, let's get back up. Here we go. All right, so here's a snapshot of the water and sewer system that is supported by the Utilities Fund. It highlights the many operational and infrastructure elements of the entire water and sewer systems. So as a reminder, the Utilities Fund is an enterprise fund, meaning the water sewer rate, along with other revenues and excess fund balance, has to fully support both the operations and the capital needs of the fund, while also maintaining the required reserves and debt service coverage. We also maintain and replace utility infrastructure in support of the County Board adopted CIP. So we'll get to that this summer. So a few notes on the pictures. The pictures on the far right are the pipe diver technology. That thing dove into our 48-inch line under the Potomac yesterday to inspect the pipe. Results are pending. We regularly do condition assessments to determine capital funding needs and priorities. So unlike streets, which have a PCI rating, which we just talked about, for water we use kind of an overall condition index, which is generated through a variety of things. In our asset management system, Cartograph, we watch the original installation dates, the type of pipe it is, what its typical life cycle it is. We blend that with our rehab and repair expertise, how many times that particular pipe is breaking in that area, and then we kind of try to normalize that along with the normal lifespans to figure out the condition index. And then we do video inspections, particularly on the sanitary sewer side. That's a lot easier than on the water side because the pipes are bigger and you've got airspace to work with. And so there we do routine inspections to categorize the conditions of our sewer pipes. And we're also working on getting that into Cartograph. We also have a new system called IT Pipes, which we keep all the video inspection records on now to keep it organized so we can look back and see how things are progressing. There's a lot of exciting initiatives going on in the Utilities Fund. First of all, the Utility Billing Information System Replacement Project. It went live in November. And that replaced our old system, which is a DOS-based system from the 90s. And there's a new customer portal for ratepayers to access their accounts. Another customer service enhancement I talked about briefly earlier is the 7 to 7 customer service hours now. Not only do we expand the hours, but now that group handles the utilities emergency calls. That benefits not only the emergency callers with a higher level of customer service and training, but it's also more convenient for those in those expanded hours who just need that additional time before or after work to contact our billing office for normal inquiries. And of course, we're currently working on the water sewer cost of service and rate study. So there's been a ton of public engagement with that, with pop-up events, a community advisory group, and of course, as you mentioned, Ms. Garvey, the online engagement tool for ratepayers to give us their feedback on their values as we look at the rates. So we're continuing our public engagement. The consultant is utilizing the feedback, and we anticipate in the fall timeframe to advance some information to you, hopefully in advance of the FY22 budget season. When we do that, though, you're going to see trade-offs amongst the different users. The amount of revenue that we need to generate won't change. So how we generate it through the rates might. Some behaviors will be incentivized, others disincentivize, and different impacts to different customer segments. We also recently completed a strategic water meter plan, which looks at our new technologies and informs our decisions on how we plan for meter system replacements when they reach end of life. And we're currently piloting different technologies with different sets of customers to see what works best in Arlington and for our customers. I think we've got one at Virginia Hospital Center now with a new technology, one of our largest customers on the commercial side. We're also continuing our first phase of projects related to the solids master plan. Those are what we call the immediate needs projects, replacing processes or equipment at the end of life, including the bar screen equipments and ventilation, and the motor control center at the preliminary treatment building. So we're in the design phase currently. We'll wrap up at the end of the fiscal year and then go out to bid. Our overall expenses and utility funds are proposed at $103.7 million, a less than 1% increase from FY20. Revenues are projected increase to 104.7. That difference in $1 million will add to the fund balance to maintain reserves at the appropriate 90-day reserve level. The base level of FTEs is proposed to increase by 1 for training support. We'll talk about that in a couple slides. The water and sewer rate is proposed to increase by just 2.9%. That'll take the average household cost, assuming 60,000 gallons per typical customer. So that'll go from 828 to 852, 24 annually, or $2 a month increase. So each year, we highlight to the board the regional comparison of annual water and sewer costs for the average residential household. Again, at 60,000 gallons annually. Next year, we might adjust that down because with low flow everything and low water usage, we're starting to actually see less than 60 now. So this year, look at the green line. Arlington remains the lowest cost jurisdiction with those more mature infrastructures inside the Beltway that need replacement at the rate we do. And so at an average of 852 annually. So if you look at, more importantly, over the last 5 years, we've had just a 7% increase overall, while some of the jurisdictions are popping more around 3% annually. The first budget change proposal is for the large valve inspection program, and that would inspect, exercise, rehab, repair critical valves to make sure they work properly in emergency, and of course during routine operations. That would include 500 large valves and air release valves. Those are those defined as large as 16 inches or bigger, those based on our transmission lines. So the first round of inspections would be done on a 2-year cycle at $300,000 per year, and then we would add them to our other inspection programs that are completed by staff, which is already running well on the smaller valves. Then the rehabs would be funded through the CIP program that we already have. We'll talk about that this summer. And again, there's the water line picture. And the story on that one, of course, was that had we not exercised that valve and made sure it worked, then the effects on a community would have been even much, much more significant. So the other budget change proposal is for a human resource admin specialist to support training in our Water Sewer Streets Bureau. This is really critical since we recently implemented a new career ladder for our water sewer streets technicians, so they have a clear path for their future. So this is a skills-based career ladder, and it has to be able to catalog needed training, track what each employee has accomplished, what needs to be accomplished next, so they can move up through the ladder. This position is actually split between the utilities fund and general fund, so that's why you see those dollar amounts. Since it handles that's going to support all the employees who are down in that bureau. So if you look at the little diagram down on the bottom there, that's our new career path, graphically. It shows how they can progress from an entry-level equipment operator or technician to senior, then master tech, then eventually the opportunities for crew leaders and even trades manager leaders at the top. So that's it on the utilities fund. We could go straight into stormwater.
Maybe I'll just see
Good
quickly if
discussion.
anybody's got any questions for the moment. Anything on this one? No. And I'll just do another plug for the water main break on Chain Bridge. I'm out in the community, and there's some people that are saying that's a sign of how bad we are, that break happened. And actually, I think it was absolutely heroic and amazing what we did and that we were able to fix it. So I said this earlier, I would love someone to do a little video or something. I mean, it was so exciting when you actually talked about what it did and the team that was put together. And the one heading up the team, as I remember, was a fairly petite woman, which I loved. I just think there's a real opportunity for a really good message there that would help to get the story out to the community and help our community understand more what we do. I'm just finding more and more that people really don't understand, and I think the more we can kind of do that, we'll have better conversations and understanding, which would be good. So I'll just
We like telling our stories.
Yep, and then last question on training the employees. I think that's great, this training program. I know this is one nationwide, where when all the baby boomers retire, we could be in a world of hurt with our water treatment and everything. Where are we doing recruiting as well? Are we working with our local high schools or going out? I'm just kind of curious what we're doing there, because I think it's a really important issue.
The key thing that we did at the same time we did the career ladder was we raised the pay of these employees
help.
to attract more. I mean, because we were not at the right competitive standpoint. And so it was a really cooperative engagement that we had with our employees and the HR team to bring their pay back up. And that's probably the most significant thing we do. We offer, and then if we offer the pay, the great training environment, and Harry and his team have worked really well on the culture and the environment and how we communicate and how we work as a team. All those things make this an attractive place. So we also have people who move between different parts of DES. I routinely get the opportunity to talk to these guys when we have like promotion ceremonies, and they maybe Shaney hired them for the leaf season as a temporary operator, and they worked for there, and they moved her over, and then they got the opportunity as soon as they could to come over and try to get a technician job in water service streets, and they worked their way around and move up.
I think it's just a great career ladder and opportunity that a lot of people are not aware of. And actually, that video I suggested might be as good as a recruitment tool. Okay, I think we're ready to the next one. Thank you so much. Stormwater.
We'll move straight into stormwater. So here's a quick overview. Similar to the utilities fund, it has to support both the operations and the capital. It's a special revenue fund. Funds are generated by an ad valorem tax rate on real estate assessments. And of course, our strategy is guided by the adopted 2014 Stormwater Master Plan. We're now in the 12th year of our program, and we've seen tremendous growth in capital needs over the recent years. So environmental quality, of course, is a significant program driver and a regulatory requirement. We just recently received the draft permit on February 19th. It's now under review for changes from the prior permit. We're actually meeting with DEQ next week on this. DEQ, however, was delayed in getting us this next permit, and so now our second permit cycle is expected to be FY21 through 25. And that requires meeting a 40% total reduction target, and we're on track to that, particularly with having the extra bonus years. But we estimate this will eat up our capital resources. Of course, after that, into the third permit cycle, we have the even steeper climb in the third permit for an additional 60%, and that's going to require those resources that are significant. So the third permit cycle then would go 26 to 30, and it would be a total ending in 2030. Okay, so while we're already doing a lot of work based on localized flooding the last couple of years, the pace and intensity obviously picked up substantially after July 8th, and we've done some real soul searching on all aspects of stormwater management. So we're taking a comprehensive approach to flood resiliency, including the design and execution strategies for watershed scale CIP projects, reviewing policies and best practices, exploring innovative approaches, even if we couldn't find best practices and we thought we needed something. And then as Mike, Moon, Demetra, and Aaron Miller discussed last week at the manager's report, there's an interdepartmental work group focused on 4 main topic areas shown here: emergency response and life safety, development and regulations, strategic improvements, communications and engagement. And so, as the manager recommended when he first released the budget, he'll be recommending a bond referendum to fund the stormwater projects. But that means, of course, that the funding will have to be raised to pay for the debt service, either through a tax rate increase or through the formation of a stormwater utility and fees to go with that, which we are exploring and talk about in a little more detail. First, the stormwater team did have a tremendous response and workload following the July 8th storm. Here's a few stats, and it shows a quick snapshot of all the valuable work and activities they performed after the floods, from site visits and floodproofing technical assistance to civic association and other meetings. As part of the county board guidance, you asked for a review of the Stormwater WISE program. So let's just first cover those basics. It's a popular program, incentivizes water quality improvement, and to some degree, water quantity control in what I view as our biggest opportunity space, existing single-family homes, which from an area standpoint, make up about 40% of our land area. It does that by matching dollar for dollar up to a max limit for projects like those shown here: pervious pavement, conservation landscape, and rain gardens, and pavement removal. So all those projects are intended to both filter and soak more in on site before it becomes runoff into our system and ends up in the bay. It's currently a programmatic element in our MS4 permit, and it's viewed positively by the regulators who just sent us that draft permit. And it's a small part of our budget overall at $128,000 annually. It serves about 60 homeowners and 10 HOAs or businesses on an annual basis. So our analysis shows that it leverages private investment for $3.60 for every $1 spent by the county. So we think that's a pretty good return for an incentive program. However, given that public cost share for improvements, it does raise some important policy questions. And of course, we'll face similar questions that will emerge as we consider a stormwater utility. So, as shown here, the questions center on the effectiveness of the program, who pays, who benefits over time, should we change the emphasis of the program to more directly incentivize flooding control, and of course, how does that inform the future of the program? Some of those questions, of course, transcend this small Stormwater WISE program. However, in this particular program, it would be good to have a little discussion on this because in this case, the budget does line up with us talking with regulators, and we'd have some sense of what your thoughts are. It'd be helpful as we start those negotiations. The board also asked for more information on a stormwater utility feasibility study. So this slide kind of lays out the basic approach and illustrates where the study is likely to go. So our current stormwater funding, again, is a simple ad valorem methodology based on assessed value, and some properties, like nonprofit churches, are exempt. And so while different approaches have been tried, the common approach is fee-based on how each property contributes to stormwater runoff. So it's typically based on the impervious area of each property. And a typical way to charge the fee is based on the equivalent residential unit, or ERU, which is a statistical median of impervious surface area in a single-family residential property, and we would have to then calculate it then for our unique conditions and properties. The example illustrated on the bottom of the slide is from Alexandria. It shows that principle. So we're in the process of hiring a consultant. The consultant would examine important administrative and equity issues, including what it is exactly that we bill and how we bill it, the impacts on various classes of properties and their owners, how much change there would be from now, how we do it, to the mythical, typical homeowner. Administrative and overhead costs that would be involved in establishing initially and then sustaining the billing as things change, because if it's impervious changes over time, people do things at their houses. So while the pros and cons of a stormwater utility structure are relative to one's current versus future position in any recommendation, most of them begin with the concept of equity, and that the fees that would be based on an actual impact of runoff. And that's typically the amount and type of impervious cover. So if you start with a basic premise of equity, there's other considerations for decision-making. Those properties currently exempt from taxes that they would pay fees. Because a typical utility fee has to maintain its own set of data that manage the changes and appeals, it would likely involve a higher overhead cost than we currently have. So in a typical scenario, when people go to a utility, there's a burden shift to those, quote, causing the problem. In this case, that's typically single-family homes, churches with large surface lots, things like that, away from high-rise commercial. And of course, there's tax considerations. The impact, of course, will vary by individual, because under a stormwater utility, the fees would not be deductible as a tax. So there's a whole range of policy choices to consider, including different customer classes and the respective rates that would go with them. So other people have done this. In fact, many municipalities in Virginia have created stormwater utilities. There's a decent pool of information on how long this takes, anywhere from 2 to 3 years from when you start the study until you reach implementation. So our strategy is this. We're going to have some interim deliverables for our CIP discussions this summer. And at that time, we'll really work hard to be as transparent and give the public and the board a sense of where things may go, so that when the voters go to the bond referendum in the fall, they kind of know where things may go. So again, we're already getting quotes from the contractor. We hope to avoid the purchase order next week. The Flood Risk Reduction Working Group came up with some recommendations for areas of emergency response and life safety notifications. And that would include 2 transportation alert warning signals for motorists at locations to be determined. We have like 4 priority intersections. We'll figure out which ones work, because some of them involve VDOT. And in the proposed budget, we originally proposed 300 residential flood sensors for high-risk homes with living areas that are below grade. The whole idea there was intended to change behaviors so people normalize their use, much like they use smoke detectors or CO detectors today. So Board Member Dorsey asked at one of the work sessions a great question about whether they could be networked, presumably with the intent of data aggregation and better warning for what's already coming downhill. The answer, unfortunately, though, is no. There aren't any off-the-shelf systems like that, although there are ones that operate on a home Wi-Fi system. So you could just have it in your own home, and it could alert you, for example, if you're on vacation. Some people tie it into their security companies or whatever. So we'll leave that sensor purchase issue with the board. At a minimum, we'd like to educate people and tell them where and how to buy them. The goal is behavior change to save lives. And in the discussion, I can also share with you some of the thoughts I've got from the fire guys on how they do it with smoke detectors. Okay, so bottom line for stormwater, there's no tax rate increase proposed this year, but because the fund's revenue is based on a fixed tax rate and assessments went up, with the assessment growth, the fund's revenue and expenses increased 5% from previous year. And then there's some remaining revenues that come in from LDA fees. So it's all got to balance out and cover both operating and capital. Of course, so when the operating expenses increase, the amount available for capital decreases. So this year, the operating expenses increased to accommodate contractual increases for tree planting, street sweeping, maintenance of the county stormwater facilities, which we do a lot of that by contract for BMPs, employee increases, and the utility feasibility study. But we're also proposing 2 more inspectors from the stormwater fund, and let's go into those details on that. The simple reason is our MS4 permit. So our MS4 permit requires us to inspect all sites every 2 weeks. And our current workload is around 250 active sites at one time. We also have to inspect all sites under constructions within 48 hours of a significant rain event, because that's when bad things happen, erosion, sediment, fences break, and so forth. So due to resource constraints, in that scenario, we can't get there in time, and we're currently focused on inspecting the large and complex problem areas after rain events, going where the biggest threat is. Plus, inspectors must also investigate all stormwater-related complaints or problems reported by property owners or the community without exception. So, as you can imagine, with all the work in our single-family neighborhoods, this has led to a significant work increase for the current staff, neighbor to neighbor. So on tight lots next to construction, we get a lot of activity and a lot of complaints. And basically, our inspectors are involved in that space where they try to keep the peace on the street while they're also trying to keep the sediment out of the street. It's a lot of neighbor to neighbor interaction. So we're not able to meet those requirements of the permit with our current staffing of 6 inspectors. The inspector has an average workload of 41 permits per month. And our regular site inspections take typically 4 to 6 weeks to perform. The discrepancy is due to a significant increase basically in the number of single-family additions, tear-downs, and new construction. And of course, the uptick, which is beneficial for the community, of large-scale commercial redevelopment. You can see kind of some of the trends there on the left graph. I will simply note this, that the requested positions will improve, but not totally resolve the ability of the county to meet their MS4 inspection obligations. And maybe that's something we can also talk about DEQ, about how other people are doing, and if there's innovative ways to do it that we're not seeing, we'll also explore those as well as part of our permit negotiations. All right, which ties me then to the fee side, which is directly linked to the 2 FTEs I just spoke of. We are proposing increasing the land disturbing activity or LDA permit fees for single-family dwellings and additions to offset the cost of adding the 2 LDA stormwater inspectors. Basically, the principle that Ms. Crystal was just trying to explain, we're trying to apply to this particular request. So the additional revenue of $305,000 would pay for the 2 requested positions. Although these fees are increasing a significant amount, in the context of the entire building permit fee, so for single-family dwellings or additions with less than 2,500 square feet, or total building permit fees would be increasing 3.4%. So for dwellings or additions that disturb more than 2,500 square feet, the combined LDA permit fees would increase 11%. So it kind of depends on how you look on it, but they are a significant increase. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the fees, just kind of redundant to an earlier discussion, the 2.5% increase for all development services fees. And on the sum that comes to the stormwater side too, what impact would be $28,000 in the positive direction. Another add to the stormwater program was be proposed as a senior program manager. That position would lead the capital program that's become so much in the forefront of our community's mind, overseeing the capacity infrastructure projects and maintenance capital. It's a really critically important position to support and execute the CIP. It'll provide project management and program oversight, implement the results of the risk assessment and management plan, or the RAMP, and of course, get in that space with critical community communications and challenges. As we talk about capital and regulatory needs for stormwater, there are many parallels and similarities to the water and sewer utility, so we thought it'd be appropriate to provide a regional context. This is our 4-year rate comparison. For annual household cost, we tried to normalize as much as we can given different people's structures. Compared to most of our peers, we aren't charging very much. We're down at the bottom there in the green line. And the bottom line is that we charge currently less than half of Fairfax and about 1/3 of Falls Church in DC. So as I look forward to the CIP process in the stormwater space, we'll also be holding a number of public engagement opportunities, both online and in person. So whoever's listening today, we encourage them to join us on March 26th at Washington Liberty High School for a stormwater open house. That'll be an opportunity for the public to review our preliminary work group recommendations and provide us feedback and their concerns. That concludes my stormwater portion.
Thank you very much. And now we'll hear from I think we only have one commission. Mr. Bloom, you're here. Come on up. E2C2, is there anyone else that I've missed?
I'm here also, Claire Noakes from the
Yeah.
Energy Committee.
Absolutely.
We're the real CEP.
Okay, that's great. Ms. Noakes, welcome.
Thanks.
So I have this little patter about how we're trying to keep a tight schedule, et cetera, et cetera. This is 3 minutes. And I don't absolutely hold you to it, but it's just so we all keep in mind. I think you'll be fine. So, and it's besides it's green. So there we go.
I'll see what I
Go
can
ahead.
do.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
So I'll try and be quick. Good afternoon, Chair Garvey and everyone. Happy to be here. I'd like to start off with some thank yous. I'd like to thank the board and everyone involved in solarizing Fire Station 8. That was just a great surprise to find in the budget. I'd like to thank everyone involved in responding to the stormwater needs, the urgency and some of the innovative short-term fixes like the flood sensors, and really looking forward to the big investments that are coming down the pike that will give us the long-term solutions we need. I'd like to thank everyone involved in working on the transition of the county's fleet to electric vehicles. 37 Leafs is a really good start. And finally, I'd like to thank the one person who addressed climate change by name in the budget. It's hard to solve a problem if you can't name it. I kind of made us think about that last year, and this year it got 3 hits, 0 last year, 3 hits this year, all of them in Mark Schwartz's opening message, so thank you. So bottom line is, we like what's in the budget. So let's talk about what's not in the budget. Our concerns are in 2 areas, CEP implementation needs and the solid waste budget. Claire Noakes will address the CEP implementation needs in some detail. I'll just note that climate science is clear about the need for speed on climate action, and that climate action now is far more powerful than the same action taken later. So it's just important to do all we can as soon as we can. And the other point I have to make about the air budget is that despite all the demands created by the new CEP plan and the extreme makeover of energy policy that's going on right now in Richmond, that's going to create new demands, new opportunities. It's a good thing, but it's new demands on staff and budget. The proposed air budget is still $350,000 lower than it was before it was cut rather drastically a couple of years ago. We were assured that it was just an awful year, and that the budget would be restored once better times returned, and that's very much what we'd like to see now through strategic funding for staff and consulting that Claire will outline. The other concern is with the solid waste budget, which you've discussed a bit. The board passed the zero waste policy 5 years ago, and the first steps toward meeting this challenge still haven't been taken, still haven't been funded, and really no progress has been made toward that board action. And the first step is to develop a plan to implement the policy. And we eliminated the planner position who would have undertaken that work, and that happened last year. So now we're left in a situation where we could use consultants, we could find a way to have staff do the work, but we think that the work needs to be done. And it's just time. The second item is the household food waste collection. That the program's ready to go, and food waste is by far the largest part of the waste stream that can be put to beneficial use. As you guys discussed, there's a new local facility opening this spring that can handle this food waste. Plans are in place for public education and rollout, with collection beginning in January. And the cost to to each household would be about $15 per year, which we consider to be a great bargain and would still keep our rates well below neighboring jurisdictions. So strong community support for this program. It's been delayed. We don't think it should be delayed another year. Last point I'll make, I'll just want to pick up on a point that Mr. DeFerranti raised about the art buses. And just for the record, he and I have never talked about this subject. But I am thinking very much along the same lines, and I know many other people are embarrassed by the art buses. And the issue is not the go green, fine. The issue is the back of the bus where it says powered by clean natural gas. And not even the gas industry says that anymore. They use more artful language. It's not a supportable statement. As a 10 years ago when we were focused more on traditional pollutants, and natural gas reduces traditional pollutants very nicely. Nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, does a great job with those. Now our concern is more with climate and in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. The buses and natural gas are not a good solution. They're very close to diesel when you look at the life cycle impact of natural gas. That is, from fracking through any little leakages along the way through the bus use. So to me, it seems like a no-brainer to paint just the background green color that's already there, just paint it over. Some buses are already like that. That's it. I appreciate your consideration of all of these issues and look forward to staying engaged and happy to answer questions anytime.
Great, thank you. Ms. Noakes?
Thank you, Chair Garvey and members of the board, for allowing us the opportunity to share our thoughts this afternoon, as well as our concern and best wishes for Eric Gutschall and his family. I'm Claire Noakes, Vice Chair of the Energy Committee, and I am here to ask that more resources be directed towards Community Energy Plan implementation. Specifically, the EC would like to see funding for CEP initiatives increased from the proposed $150,000 to $300,000, and we would like to see an additional air staff position considered in the near term. And no, that was not coordinated. The county manager proposed $150,000 for CEP initiatives, including studying microgrids, developing EV charging infrastructure plans, and developing load shape profiles to better understand peak energy use. All of these topics are critical to drive progress and save money on energy costs. But we have two concerns about the funding levels. First, these topics are complex, and an adequate study of them will likely exceed the budget. To take one example, microgrids need to be studied for multiple locations for multiple purposes. Emergency power needs, power quality, peak shaving, and energy arbitrage opportunities. Too little funding risks producing a narrow study that is not as useful. Second, there are many more topics that need research, especially once the CIP implementation framework is finalized in June. We need to study community choice aggregation and other approaches to obtaining greater control over our electricity supply. There are indications that we could experience a spike in energy costs in the upcoming years. As a matter of energy equity, we need to study energy affordability. That's a part of housing affordability, and to find scalable approaches to reduce energy costs for low and middle income residents, such as rooftop solar or efficiency programs. These efforts could simultaneously tackle our energy and housing affordability goals. With these examples in mind, the EC believes that $300,000 is a conservative request. The scientific community and local public opinion support making fast progress on these issues. Our second request is for an additional staff position on the AIR team. The Energy Committee values the excellence and enthusiasm that the AIR team brings, but their workload is already high, and it's about to get busier. AIR will be launching new strategies and programs under the revised CEP, and there are likely profound changes in energy policy coming out of Richmond this month. Taking advantage of these will require staff time to track down funding opportunities, respond to new initiatives driven by Richmond for solar panels, power purchase agreements, and demand management. In short, this is what we've been waiting for, and we don't want to miss these opportunities because staffing levels were set for a previous era. We know that the ink isn't dry on legislation, and the CEP implementation framework is a couple months away. We ask that you commit to seriously consider an additional staff position, given that this is an entirely foreseeable situation. Thank you for your consideration of these comments and for all your dedication in making CEP implementation happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. All right, colleagues. Questions for our commissioners, for our staff? Who wants to go first? Mr. DeFranti.
Well, I think, Mr. Bloom, your comments and Mr. Dorsey's comments asking me to clarify what I was talking on the buses, clearly we did not coordinate because I was inartful, and Mr. Bloom, I think, captured it much better. I would sort of revise my remarks. You captured it, I think. And then I think, I guess I would say, with respect to both your comments on the CEP, that, you know, it's been 3 months, and we've already had a major step forward, thanks to the team and the manager and the AIR team. So no good deed goes unpunished. What have you done in the last 33 days is sort of the import of what you've said. And so I don't think there's anything wrong, but it won't stun you that I think that there's some fair reasoning in the two buckets that you both have described, and I really appreciate that. So that's one thought. And then I also have other thank yous, and this is really all my questions. A big thank you on page 39 and 40. This is for the Stormwater Senior Manager. I know that'll help the two of you, Ms. McBride and Mr. Papadopoulos, I think. Have I got that correct? Papacosma. I apologize. But I really have supported it. I think it can make a big difference. I don't want you to work 24/7. So I really support that. And then web page 813, that's the only other question. It's related to stormwater maintenance. You described, Mr. Emanuel, the inspector role and the maintenance role. And we've gotten a lot of questions about how often we clean the stormwater facilities. And I guess it's important role to mediate between neighbors, I think, as we try to serve our citizenry. But the only question is whether the two inspectors give us enough resources in the maintenance area so that we can keep the infrastructure we have as open so that we can deal with events that come up.
Well, I appreciate that opener question. The inspectors who are inspecting LDAs is a different set of work than the maintenance of the system. Although, of course, you know, if things go wrong on a construction site, then you may have to, and there's a sediment dump, then you may have to clean out that particular inlet or something. In that way, they're related. But it gives me an opener to talk a little bit about the maintenance of the system. We did an enormous amount of post-storm evaluation, talked to people, and looked in the system and got down in the system and looked at it with cameras and people where appropriate, because some of them are large. Particularly with larger pipes, they are self-cleaning. When you have a lot of water, they are self-cleaning. I think, Mr. Dorsey, you made a comment about a bumper or something that was lodged in somewhere.
Car bumper.
It was lodged on an inlet structure. When you have a big dynamic, intense rainfall and you have blockage, we routinely see that because that's kind of like the most narrow point of a system. a blockage of, sometimes a tree branch or a piece of lawn furniture or whatever, that it gets things hung up. But that did not cause flooding and problems, although those are things that people barely visibly and easily see. The problem was the capacity in the pipes, right? So it doesn't, and typically, when you have that much rain and that much flow, if a particular inlet is closed, you may have, as a result, more water on the surface or on the road, but then it jumps down to the next inlet point. And so it's not causing the flooding. The flooding is the problem of not having enough capacity in the system and not enough overland relief. So those are the basics of what happens in the dynamic of a storm.
Great, thanks. So, Leah.
Ms. Crystal.
Yeah, I want to follow up first, just thanks to our ETC2 leadership. I wanted to follow up on a couple of their questions or comments, rather. Really appreciated Ms. Noak's specificity about exactly how big as well as detailed the scope of our consulting studies could in fact be. I wonder if staff could give us a little more insight into how you arrived at the 150K figure, what studies you think are feasible within that amount, what would be deferred to a later date, yeah.
I'm not trying to totally evade the question, but I think I kind of want to hold off until we roll out our CEP implementation framework to better answer your question. We tried to just, it's an initial estimate based on not knowing where the CEP implementation framework exactly was going to take us. And we also have to look at our ability to execute it and get that consultant on board quickly and start charging it, because we don't want to over budget, right up front. And again, I'm going to go back to the brief conversation that I started and Mr. Schwartz finished, was that if we find ourselves in a situation where we need those resources or the consultant study is more or whatever, then we will approach the manager for the contingency or hire the additional staff out of cycle if needed. There's ways to do that.
Okay. I appreciate that. I think normally that would be a fully satisfactory answer to me if we were talking about really any other kind of planning study or comp plan element. But I am really cognizant of Mr. Bloom's point that any action we can take within fiscal year 21 will pay dividends that so exceed what they might even a few years later. So I think that's probably just one for us to keep reflecting on. But I do really appreciate that you have a plan, right? There is literally a contingency plan, which is to say the manager's contingent to be able to do more of that. The other comment from Mr. Bloom I wanted to follow up on, I have heard a little bit about the new regional facility for food waste. Has staff evaluated that and the opportunity to participate in it? Do you have any preliminary thoughts for us?
Yes, I'm glad you also asked that opener question. We have been engaged with Free State Farms. It's out on Ballsford Road, up by Manassas. And they are, as Mr. Bloom has correctly indicated, but actually we believe at this time, in previous years they said they were going to be ready, and they weren't ready yet. Mm-hmm. We are getting closer to where we think that, the date that they're advertising, it looks like it might actually come true, probably this summer for initial operations. And then, of course, when you open a facility like that, it takes a while to get fully operational. So knowing what we know about our contract and its abilities, that we have that option, knowing that this facility looks like it's about ready to open, but is not yet open, we try to figure out what the right thing to do with the budget is. So we have approached the owner-operator of this new facility, and we are trying to secure rights. And if there's a board action that's required for us to secure rights, or there's a cost for that to come into an agreement, then we would bring that to the board so that we then secure rights. And right now, it was going to be like a right of first offer, or a certain number of tons we set aside, or whatever. We are very actively exploring that to include conversations that were happening this morning. So we're all about securing the rights so that we have that flexibility. And if that's what it takes within their construct, right now they have capacity, and we are just basically taking the right steps to make sure that we're at the front of the line.
I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you. I did have a couple questions about stormwater, but I'm happy to let another colleague chime in.
Should we go move to stormwater, Mr. Dorsey? Have you got something different?
Yeah, I do have other stuff, and then we go to stormwater.
Yeah, because I think we'll spend a lot of time on stormwater.
Okay, so just moving to just a little comment about the art bus thing. While I love the conversation about paint, and just correct me if my understanding is not correct. And I've long been an advocate for our not doing anything that eliminates our ability to quickly pivot to hybrid electric or fully electric transit vehicles when the time comes. But I've been advised that we are not there yet. But the whole point of CNG being described as clean, if it's described as such, is relative to other hydrocarbon fuels, not compared to electric. So, you know, there is, I think, a firm argument to be made that CNG, when compared to other hydrocarbons, is still the clean alternative, and the industry is overwhelmingly fueled by those kinds of vehicles because electric is not quite there yet. So I definitely appreciate where you all are coming from, but it's not as aspirational or as outdated, I think, as we've been describing.
Silly me. I've always thought it was because when you drive behind those old buses and they spew out all of this horrible stuff, I thought that's what it was. Just saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, those are typically powered by diesel,
and they're
and CNG
dirty.
is far better than diesel.
Yeah. But we get your point.
Traditional pollutants, really much better.
Yeah.
But climate is really, you know, modern clean diesel. There's a lot of debate on the climate side, and that's a big focus now.
Appreciate it. The other question I had before we get to stormwater is this, well, I guess it's the Stormwater Wise program, so should I
I think
save that?
we ready to move to stormwater? We're ready to move. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so for that one, just, I really love the scope of the study, and I think you're asking a lot of the right questions. And I think when you sort of home in on that who benefits question as part of our equity analysis, we should think about it not just in terms of the demographics and the means of the people who are participating in the program, but the benefits that their improvements bring to others, not just themselves. You know, there's one thing to talk about the return or the leveraged investments on one particular site versus targeted improvements which actually improve multiple sites or multiple circumstances. While I think it's great if anybody's able to pursue something that you know, improves runoff on their own property, it's really even better and a better use of funds overall to look at targeting resources towards making improvements which could benefit multiple homes, neighborhoods, or, you know, even more. So that's just a comment on that. And why don't we go to others for the many stormwater questions?
Sure.
But if I could hopefully maybe tee up something, if we're all interested in rain, storm flow sensors.
Oh, that's actually where, that's what I was going to move
Okay.
to, because
All right.
we have a resident here who's been waiting through the whole meeting. I thought I would bring it up, because I think that's why he's here. But go ahead, Mr. Dorsey, go ahead, take it away.
This is not the flood sensors program. I mean, there's a, where I think there's been a disconnect. We have in our budget guidance and what we have talked about are flood sensors for homes and for intersections. There was a conversation a few years ago before our time, Ms. Crystal, about storm flow sensor capabilities, tying into rain gauges so that you can actually collect data on an ongoing basis, which looks at surges in streams and other places, also tied into water quality so that you could anticipate events happening
And I
versus being
think it was part of
reactive to
our
them.
2014 Stormwater Master Plan, which was very handily copied out and given to me, and probably to you too at the meeting. Go ahead.
So with that as the dropping off point, what is our capability for storm flow monitoring presently, just to get a clear baseline on where we
Maybe
are?
Jason, or come up and help me on that one? Mr. Papacosmo will probably have the longest knowledge on the team of this.
Hi, everybody. So are you thinking specifically for the pipes or the streams, just to kind of clarify?
Either.
Just in general. So one way to answer that is it's not easy to do. It takes a decent amount of maintenance and oversight. So for example, in 4 Mile Run at Shirlington, the USGS, who's sort of the gold standard in monitoring, has an active monitoring station there that's been there for quite some time. And they make visits frequently to make sure it's working, to calibrate it, to make sure it's recording accurately. So that's an area where we'd like to, consider expanding to monitor other areas, but it does have a cost, so we have to look at it relative to the budget and the other needs. And that's different from monitoring the pipes themselves, which is somewhat tied into the sensor programs and that effort. It's a little easier to monitor flow in pipes because they're a controlled environment, but there's still a cost that goes with those. So I believe the approach is to focus on the sensors first as a pilot or a starting point and build from there. But we don't have a widespread monitoring network overall.
But by sensors, you're talking about the reactive sensors, the ones that tell you when something has happened versus something that's monitoring flow so that you would have data which would alert you that something is going to happen.
I think it's both in that case.
Okay, so maybe
early
if you could just take
warning,
another minute to describe more fully what you intend the sensor program to be.
Mike, you want to take the details on that one?
Yeah, I will.
Actually, if I could just add on, could you just tell us how they work? I'm looking at that picture and I realize I have absolutely no idea how they work.
Just for
So tell us how they work and then tell them the program.
Yeah, just to clarify what is actually we proposed was these, there were actually right-of-way activation sensors. So when there's actually a flood impact on the road where water's impounding the road, that we could alert citizens by, it's basically a sensor that's next to the pavement or on the shoulder of the road that actually senses the water elevation. And so it activates the sensor, you have flashing lights, and then there's the working group identified 4 critical locations in the county that these may be applied. We wanted to pilot 2 to get a feedback, a trial on them. And then we had the other home sensors that we briefed you on last week that we're pivoting a little bit here in this slide. What you're speaking of, Board Member Dorsey, is that is the actual working group did look at gauges, and Alexandria actually has some of those, and those can be brought back to through a networking capability. What we did find, though, and one of the reasons we didn't recommend them is we've talked to Alexandria, myself, Demetra, Aaron Miller. They have a somewhat of a higher capital cost, and then the ongoing recurring maintenance, as Jason alluded to, it's like a 20% cost element. So, we thought this would be a phased approach and consider these. It's not saying that we can't get into the other weather, the stream gauge information that can be brought back to a central location for monitoring. But so that technology does exist. I want to clarify.
So we've got the tech. It's feasible. I presume it works, but we're essentially cost prioritizing, not pursuing it at this time. Is that a fair?
That's where we are.
Okay.
So if I could just follow up, because I have these handy pages from the 2014 study. And what it said back in 2014 was after, particularly the June 2006 storm that was so big, that we didn't know exactly, how the storm sewer system actually responded, because we didn't really know the amount and the timing of the runoff and what it was being asked to do. Do we have an idea of how our system is responding and what its capacity is and what came with the storm flows? I assume we have some information. I don't know if Ms. McBride might have some answers on that as well, but yeah.
We know the size of our pipes. We can model pretty accurately what happens in a particular assumed storm. Each storm, however, is unique and different. They occur just like anything else on a bell curve. And for the ones that are on the far end of the bell curve, the intensity and the amount, it's a huge variation. The other problem in doing post-storm analysis is it's not just, it's one thing here, and then half a mile away, it's very different. So the amount of sensors that you would need to really gather and analyze and have that much data is enormous, because you can have a cloud burst right there, and the rate half a mile away is very different.
And we do know, I think, where our problems are in our system, right? Because we've gotten briefed, and that sometimes there's a large pipe that comes into a tiny pipe, and we know that's where the problems are caused, right? So that we have some sense of what the capacity issues are at those specific points. Okay, I see head nods. And I guess what I'm going to then ask is, in 2014, we did this stormwater master plan, but I think what I'm hearing from you is that the suggestions in here on how to monitor stream and storm sewer pipe flows, while it was recommended in the master plan at the time, you no longer agree with what was recommended in the master plan? Is that, I mean, I'm trying to figure out, because people come with these master, and here it is, and so I'm trying to figure out what the issue is.
That's a fair question. I think I might want to talk with my team some more and get back to you on that in writing.
That is absolutely fine if you want to
And
get
that
back,
might
and I can leave you
actually-
these, I'll leave you these pages.
That
so you
might,
can- yeah.
that might come back as a part of a CIP discussion too as well.
Okay, all right. But, I think there's just a concern that we don't really understand what our storm system is doing. I do, in my briefings, I think we have a pretty good understanding, but, it's always hard if you've got something that's recommended in a report and it doesn't seem like we're actually doing it. So I'll just give this to you for the moment, if that's okay, and appreciate
Thank
coming
you.
back. Thank you. Thank you very much.
The other thing I would add on this is from the stormwater master plan versus what happened on July 8th is there was a strong correlation between the capacity problems that we studied and documented in the master plan and what happened in real life. Again, every storm is different, but we know where the capacity issues are in the system, and that's what we're trying to take action on.
And I know you are, and I know we took some actions after the 2006 form,
Absolutely.
which helped some, but it just didn't handle the 2018 or 19 one that we had, yeah.
And one thing I
Mr.
would add, Chairman Libby, is that, Chairman Carr.
Chairman Libby kind of sounds fun, it's all right.
We actually do have a good modeling of our system, so we do know where the problems are. I think this is really more about what we prioritized versus necessarily disagreement with the master
Can
plan.
we share those models with residents?
Well, they're engineering models.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we certainly, it's probably more appropriate to show them outcomes of that versus the engineering
I bet
input
we have
data.
some engineers that would love to look at it. We
They
can
may,
talk
and
about
we
that
can
later.
get
I'm just,
invited,
I know,
fine,
yeah, but still, I can understand people would like to
But
see it. So the
I
outcomes
didn't want to
would be
leave you with the impression that we didn't know where our problems were in our system, because there's been a lot of detailed swim modeling of our system, and I think the correlation there really showed itself. And I think with the sensors, we were reacting with this prioritization, especially with that interdepartmental working group. It was public safety, and they really focused on what would be more beneficial. And because what occurred on July 8th was very much a flash flood event within a 30-minute period, they really thought hard and long about what was most useful for the public.
Oh, and that I absolutely agree with. No, I'm really pleased we're doing that, and I think it's crucial that we get those in place before this happens again. Or
And
maybe
Madam
only a
Chair.
500-year flood. Yes, Mr. Dorsey.
Before we leave this, I just would love to put a marker down for a briefing at some point as to why, we've got $129,000 to spend, why this is better over some of the other things that we've discussed. I just want to fully understand your thinking on that.
Thank you. Okay, anything more at the moment? Mr. DeFranti.
Just a thank you to Mr. Dorsey for clarifying. I think I conflated the sensors and then appreciate you moving us forward, Chair Libby, or Chair Garvey, I should say. But I want to.
Careful, Member Matt.
There you go. But I would love to be in that briefing because I think we're almost all the way there. I just want to understand what you guys are saying. So that's one thought. And then a second, and this is all I've got, which is slide 40 tells a story about how much we invest in stormwater. And it tells a really important story, I think, and I just hope that we'll come back to it because we are investing less than Fairfax, and we almost certainly have a denser real estate than they do. So that's a big victory, and using that to tell the story of what we need to do next seems really helpful. The only other thing I would say is you're doing a ton of work, and the progress in terms of work doesn't get covered quite as much as some of the challenges that are there. So that's just a thank you.
All right. Anything else at the moment? Yes, Ms. Crystal.
I have just a couple of other questions. First, I really appreciate that conversation about the flood sensors. Very helpful. So I think the question that I have, I really appreciate this effort underway to study the feasibility of a stormwater utility. I think that's exactly the right direction for us to be heading in. We know that our existing revenue sources are not up to the scale of the infrastructure we're going to need to repair, build. So I guess the question that I have is one of kind of finance and timing. Can you help me understand if we're aiming to make allocations in this upcoming CIP to stormwater infrastructure, but we won't yet know whether we're going to be pursuing a utility? How are we thinking about allocating those dollars and how many dollars we'll have to allocate? And I guess sort of a piece with that is leveraged revenue from the utility considered under our 10% debt ceiling cap, or is that because it's from a different source, it's outside of it?
Okay, so a couple of things on that, and I'm going to invite other people to elaborate. So the funding that, let me just start where we're going to, when we propose in the CIP, the scope of those investments will be based on what we think we can execute in a period of time. We're not going to be, stinting on what it is that we want to do. We're going to say, these are the things that we need to do, these are the priorities, and this are the investments. And we have cited a number somewhere, and between $100 million and $200 million for potential over, how many years was it?
10 years.
Over 10 years. Now, that number may turn out to be low or high, but when the voters go and consider a referendum, the referendum for the first 2 years of that would just be a piece of that. Okay. And so funding the debt service for that would be either done either through an increase in the tax rate or through the stormwater utility. And that would be a decision that the county board would make about a year from now. So you'd have to figure out, once the bonds, if they are approved by the voters, we wouldn't actually get around to selling them until sometime in the spring of calendar year 21. So that's a little bit over a year from now, and you would make a decision at that point how to fund it. But the voters would know what their choices were at the time as to how much we wanted to invest. Now, how it's funded, we in the past have, when we did the water pollution control plant, given the way we set it up, it does not count against our 10% debt ceiling because of the source of funding, and Michelle can relate a little bit more of the details of that. And for me, the main thing that I think voters should have in mind if they go to vote in November is a sense of how this might affect their bill when they're voting to support that kind of community investment. And so we will be able to do it. The question of how we finance it would be determined, not how much we're financing, but how we finance it would be determined about a year from now.
So that is an excellent point in terms of voters knowing how this might apply to them, although, as we discussed with utility, it will apply differentially to voters based on whether it's a utility or not. I guess the question that I have, you just put a pretty fine point on it, is if we think that this is going to be outside of our 10% debt service, and it makes every sense to me that it would, it's a different revenue source backing it, right. Then that's actually maybe a different calculation for us in our CIP than it would be otherwise. Otherwise, we are considering this debt service relative to debt service on schools, fire stations, and so forth.
Right. So in other words, it does not have to compete against the general obligation funding that we have for schools or for building facilities. But at the end of the day, you still have to pay for it, okay? So that's the point I'm making.
All right, let the record show that this board understands that we have to pay for the things that we include in our budget. I guess, and I'm sorry, I'm probably not making this point very clear. It actually matters whether we pay for it out of one revenue source or another, because if it's being paid for out of a different revenue source, that absolutely, its debt service contributes to the overall burden on our taxpayers, which we do care about very much. But it is not in direct competition with other capital
and Michelle
priorities.
will add a little bit about you can add a little bit about the history, explain what we did with the water pollution control plant and sort of the analog here.
Sure. I mean, we've issued, when we did the big $500 million expansion, which is huge to the Bay, all of that, that was financed through a combination of sources, low-cost funds for the Virginia Resources Authority, and then we also had general obligation bonds. That repayment source was the water and sewer bill that fell on both residential homes and commercial properties. So that would be the same type of analog, I guess, is how I would describe it. And it did not count in the 10%. Yeah. So while certainly it didn't compete, say, against schools or fire stations, if you look at our water sewer rate increase chart over that period of time,
it was a significant increase.
People did pay more, particularly on that sewer rate.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I guess there's not a clean answer, but I do appreciate that conversation. Here's my other question. Speaking of things paying for themselves, the single-family addition land use disturbance application fees increasing by, based on my math, about 30%. You mentioned, Mr. Emanuel, that would be designed to help recover the cost of the new staff. Is that based on a study?
Well, let me just add that it is going to recover the cost of the staff. I would like to repeat what I said before. That does not mean that the fees we are charging are fully recovering the costs of the program.
Okay, but I guess what I'm asking, and I don't mean to be like too clever by half here, but we were just talking about development services,
Right.
that we couldn't spike the fees, or do a very high increase in the fees without some kind of justification. But it appears that's what we're doing with the land disturbance activity permits, which for the record, I am okay with. I just want to know why we can't apply that same principle to development services.
We haven't done the comprehensive study yet, but we were able to do it just for this small increase of these 2 people for this need. I mean, so it's a very, so yes, we did the math. Tyler, I remember Tyler and I doing the math one afternoon.
Yeah, I would also add that I think what Greg has said about the comprehensive study is very important. We spent a lot of time as staff really looking into this one particular area to make sure we could make it net tax support neutral. To do that for all of development services is going to be a large undertaking, which is why this study is very important.
Got it, okay. So there was effectively a study, but it was small enough in scope that our professional staff could accomplish it, whereas we need outside expertise to do that for development services. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. So I appreciate the conversation we had earlier, the slide 15 on resiliency and infrastructure, and the, 150,000 going to be enough to do the consultant for what we need, and that there's some other resources, because if it comes down to like taking something off that list that we had, all the bulleted list of what this consultant funding, what you said could be used for, I think I kind of want it all. So let us know if we have to make choices, because we might not want to. If that's okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. I think that is it. We will be back here again for our next budget work session on 3 p.m. Tuesday, March 10. I am forgetting what it is. Does anyone remember, Mr. Manager?
Parks and Recreation and Technology Services.
Great. That should be a fun one. Thank you very much. Everybody take care. Thank you.